Hi, I'm Haley with the Huntsville-Madison County Public Library, and today I'm going to show you how to paint a panda with a donut painting that I have made. This is part of our summer reading programming, and our theme for this week, this is week 5, and it is, our theme for the whole summer is Imagine Your Story, and our theme for this week is to tell your story and to come up with your own. So I came up with a panda with a donut, and he's a little sad, so I'm not sure why he's sad, but I haven't figured out that part of my story yet. But this is what we are painting today, and he is super cute and super fun, and he's actually a pretty easy painting. So for this painting, you're going to need a pair of scissors to cut out your template, and I will tell you where to get that template here in a minute. You will need a pencil, some paper towels to dry your brushes on. We're going to set my panda up there. A paper plate or some other sort of surface that you can use for a paint palette. I have actually already done my paints, so I have my paint palette right here, and I'll go through those colors here in a second. You're going to need our template for our panda, and our template looks like this when you print it out. This is what it's going to look like, and you can get this template at go.hmcpl.org/letspaint. And that link will also be in our description as well. And this is page 5 of that template website, is my panda drawing here. And you'll cut that guy out and use him for our tracing. You'll also need an 8x10 canvas. So that's 8 by 10 inches. You could potentially do this on a smaller canvas, but really probably not too much smaller than this. So this is an 8 by 10 canvas. You'll need some white paint. So just to go through our colors here on my palette, the middle, which may or may not be showing up since it's white on white, is white paint. It's just apple barrel paint that I get from Walmart. It is an acrylic paint. It's super cheap, and you can get it through grocery store pickup. If you're social distancing still, hopefully. You can get that, and so you'll need white. You don't need a huge container of it like this, but just some white paint. And you're going to need a lot of that. As you can see, I have quite a bit on my canvas. I'm also using it today to mix my blue color. But for the blue background of our painting, I actually originally used this china blue color. But unfortunately, this is older and my bottle was not sealed right or something, and it actually dried up. So when I went to get some paint today for today's painting, I unfortunately didn't have any. So I'm going to be mixing that and hoping for the best that I can get close to that color that I had, because I really like it. But for the exact match to my original painting, you're going to want china blue. If you cannot find china blue, I will tell you how to mix it. So you'll also need some lavender sachet for your donut, but really you could use any donut color you want. I went with a pastel, and you just want to make sure that it is different enough from your background that it will stand out. But I will be using lavender sachet for my donut color. You need some sprinkles colors. In my original painting, I only had pink sprinkles, and they were tropic orange, which is sort of a coral orangey pink color that I like a lot. And so tropic orange was the color originally used. I'm also going to be adding, I think, some green sprinkles today. And so I'm using Key West for that. And then, of course, he is a panda. You're going to need some black paint. You don't need a ton of black paint. You can see the amounts that I've put of each of these. It's just a little bit of black paint, a lot less than the white. The white you're probably going to need to do a couple coats on, which is why I have more of that. Just a smidgen of the tropic orange and the Key West for the sprinkles. You really don't need a ton for that. Similarly, you don't need much more than the black, or you don't need as much of the black as you do with the lavender sachet. And then for the background color, this is about how much paint I would recommend. Maybe a little bit less if you're starting with the actual china blue, but because I am mixing, I went with a little bit more than I normally would, just because I don't want to run out of that color when I'm painting my background. And for that background color, I'm actually using blue cotton mixed with a lot of white, because I want a very pale sort of blue. I don't really want baby blue even. I want it sky blue, very, very, very pale sky blue sort of color is what I'm going for there. You will also need a water cup preferably one that you don't care about. I just tend to reuse a plastic cup until it just can't be used anymore, and then I recycle. I wash it really good and I recycle it if I can. You're going to need dry this guy off. You are going to need a flat paintbrush. This is about a 1-inch wide paintbrush, and this is just so that you can paint those bigger swaths of color. You don't have to. If you don't have a wide brush like this, you can totally use the smaller one that I'm going to show you. But a wide one will really help this go faster. And then you need just a regular sized little pointy brush. There's my little pointy brush for some of the detail work. And we're going to get started. I'm going to set my water cup well away from my painting. You don't want it where you're going to be dripping water across your canvas while you're painting. That really stinks. You don't want water mixing in with your paint. It'll leave a splotch if it gets on your canvas. And you want to keep your brushes in the water. This will keep them flexible and soft, and the paint won't dry on them. So when you're not using them, have them in the water. Rinse them off really, really well between paint colors, and then dry them before you stick them in new paint, which is why we have the paper towels. You need to dry them really, really good. So to start out with, you are going to trace, and I've already cut out a template. You're going to trace your template in the bottom right corner of your canvas. You're going to just line up those corners. If you look at your template, it's got the flat edges here and here. That's the part where you just line that up in the corner, and you're going to trace that. Now I have already traced mine just to save a little time on this video, but trace that, cut it out, trace it onto your canvas. You want to trace it very, very lightly. I'm not even sure if you can see it. It's so light, but I'll hold it up a little closer. You can see. You just really don't want to be pressing down with a pencil. In fact, when you're tracing, if you hold your pencil higher up while you're tracing and do like that, you'll get lighter lines generally, and that'll really help. So there's a couple things we need to do before we paint. The template is not one that you can just trace and paint. You've got to draw on a couple things. So what we're going to do is, if you see the circle here of the donut, we're just going to continue that down. So I'm just going to take that line, I'm going to even start on it, and I'm just going to follow it down and round out my donut. Super, super light again. And it doesn't have to be perfect, you guys. Donuts are handmade usually, and they're not perfect circles. So, like that. You can see mine's a little wonky. Then you are going to take and you're going to draw in his paw. And we're going to be drawing over lines, and that's okay because the paint is going to cover that. So don't worry about the fact that I just drew that and then I'm going to draw his paw over it. So if you are looking at the left-hand side of your little guy, there's a little bump right here on his side where the template bumped in, and that's where his arm starts. So you're going to take that line and you're going to take it down almost to the bottom of your canvas here and up onto your donut. You're going to round it back up. That is his little arm. And you're going to give him a little paw holding the donut. It's just a rounded paw. We're not being hype. He's very cartoony. We're not being very realistic with him. And that is okay. So like that. Then you're going to draw a bite mark in the donut. I just do through 3 little scallops in there, and I'm going to put it partially on his face, but not on his face, but the part of the donut that overlaps his face. And then the rest is going to be where the donut overlaps the background. So right about there. And because I've done that, I'm going to continue that face line down so I know where that is. And then the very last thing that you need to do without a template, other than maybe his nose, but the nose is easy, is round off his face. So we need to know where his head ends. So just give him a little rounded chin and take it over to the donut. So, like that. This little round chin. So now we are going to draw on the eyes, and this you do have a template for. That's that little piece that's off by itself That is the template for his eye patches. The eye patches, the narrow end is facing up and the wider end is lower. So you're going to put that on about where you want his eye. Keep in mind his actual eye is going to be in this wider round part. So just keep that in mind when you're placing it. You don't want it super high, but you also don't want it super duper low, because then he'll have like a weird cheek eye, and that's not great. You don't want any eyes in our cheeks. That's weird. So I'm going to trace that there. I'm going to flip it so that the flat side is always facing in. That's kind of forming his little snoot ridge there. Whoa, messed up that line really bad. That's okay. If you accidentally draw on your canvas where you don't want to, don't try to erase it. Generally speaking, erasing canvas doesn't work very well. There are some erasers that can work on it. Pencil erasers, though, are usually not the erasers that work on it, and you can make a huge, gross, like, smear on your canvas that is much harder to cover up than the pencil mark would have been. So just leave that alone. So we've drawn on his little eye patches, and if you want to, you can go ahead and draw in his eyes. I do recommend that we draw these in here. Just this big round circle in the lower part, that wide part of the eye patch. It's a big circle. Like that. So that's as much of the eye as I recommend drawing. The rest we will be adding in later, and you just do that with paint. So that's as much as I recommend adding. I actually don't recommend adding the nose, because then you have to paint around it. And you have another pencil mark to cover up, and since his face is mostly white, you might have to make your nose bigger than you want to cover up that pencil mark with a black. So we're just going to paint his nose on. It's a simple triangle with rounded points, so it's not a hard shape to do. We're going to get started painting now. The very first thing we're going to do is not our background. I almost always start with a background on my paintings, but I think today we're going to actually start with a donut because I want it to dry. We're painting the sprinkles on top of it. I didn't draw any sprinkles on, if you guys noticed that. So yeah, I think because I have some stuff I want to avoid, I'm going to go in. I'm just going to go in with my big brush. If you want to do the lines, the outlines with your smaller brush, you totally can do that. That's what I was just debating there, was whether or not I wanted to do that. So I'm going to get a little purple on my brush here. I'm going to set it down. I'm going to set it down away from the edge. So if you guys, you might not be able to see the edge, but what I'm doing is setting it down away from the edge, and I'm scooting it close to it, and then I'm going to drag it along the edge. And that way I get right up to the edge, but I have just a little bit more control over where that paint is going. I'm going to go around my bite mark, paint some of that out. Don't want to leave a glob. I'm actually using kind of the corner of my flat brush to get into those bite mark corners. It's not a huge deal like that. I just went over a little bit. It's not a huge deal if you go over the edge, but we are working with lighter colors, so the less you can go over the edge, the better, but you will be able to paint over it. Acrylics are great like that. They're very forgiving. So again, I'm going to go around the center. So I'm going to put my paintbrush down, squish it up close to that line, and then carry it around. I'm actually going to do that a bunch around the edge here. Today I will try to keep my arm out of the camera so much while I'm showing you guys what the painting is like. Because I don't want to do a second coat on this, I am using maybe a little bit more paint than I normally would, but I'm not globbing it on. I am making sure it's smoothed out. I just don't want to have to fill in any patches, so I'm trying to make sure all the white is covered and there's not any white showing through my paint. I don't want to have to do a second coat of this purple. but you don't want to glob it on. There's no need to have tons and tons of paint on your canvas. And if you do, it's going to take forever and a day to dry. Like literal forever. And we don't want that. We want it to dry so that we can paint on our sprinkles. I'm just going around his hand now, his little paw. The paw is definitely, if you go over the edge, not a big deal. You're painting black on another color and it will be super easy to cover up anything that goes over the edge there. I'm just adding in a little bit more purple on any spot where I think the canvas might be showing through. And there is my donut painted. And so I left off the paw part and I left out the bite mark. I might have done that bite mark a little dark. That's going to be not the easiest thing to cover up, but you know, we'll make it work. So next, what we are going to do is we're going to paint his face, and we're going to very carefully paint this bottom part. When we're painting these two parts, the only thing we need to be careful of right now is that we don't, when we're getting close to the donut, we don't actually accidentally pull the purple into the white, because it is not dry yet. But I did a light enough coat that it might be dry by the time I get to that part. So, some of you might wonder, why am I painting my panda's face white when the canvas is white? And that is because if you leave a part of your canvas blank, as in you don't paint it, you'll be able to tell with the final product. You'll be able to see that texture of the canvas, of the unpainted canvas. And so painting it white helps the whole thing look more cohesive, and it will help fill in the texture of the canvas so that it's not so noticeable. So I'm actually going to start down here, and I'm just going to come right up to the edge of his little arm. I'm painting right up along it, just using the edge of my brush. Being very careful while I get close to this purple. Really don't want to pull purple in. And I just flipped my brush over. What I was looking for was to see if there was any purple on the brush. There's not. I haven't really worried about my edges much today. I don't think I'm going to bother, but if you want, you can paint your edges. This is a canvas panel. If you're using a stretched canvas, unless you're going to frame it, which is unlikely because framing, that sort of thing, can be its own art form, then you definitely want to paint your sides, your edges. But on a canvas panel, it's not as imperative. So I'm going to paint that. I'm going to look really close, make sure everything's covered. I don't particularly want to do another coat, but you may very well need 2 coats on this, in which case we'll come back. But I'm just going to go ahead and do a light second coat now, in the hopes that that will cover. And there's some kind of gross, ew, get out. If you notice something in your canvas, like I think that was just a dried paint particle or a hair or something, get it out while the paint's wet so that you can fix whatever you had to do to get it out, rather than letting it dry in there. Once it's dry in there, you're just there. It's part of your art now. So keep that in mind. So now we're going to paint his head. I did not draw the head marks on his ears just because I didn't want to have to worry about covering them up. But do keep in mind his head rounds right here near his ears. I can show you guys that on my finished one here. So he has roundness right there. So just keep that in mind as you're painting your white, and make sure you do that with your brush. So I'm just going to go right into the middle. I'm going to come up to the edge of his eye patch here. And again right here. I'm going to keep painting. I like to spread the paint out as much as I can. I don't want globs of paint on there again, but with the white, that almost certainly means I will need a second coat eventually. And that is okay. We can give him a second coat, but just keep that in mind, that that's a thing that you're going to have to do because we are painting with very, very light colors, or in this case, white colors. So for the edge, again, it doesn't super matter if you go over that line a little bit because you are going to come back in with black paint. In fact, in this case, you don't necessarily even have to worry about covering up the line. If you can still see these inner lines of the eye patches through the white, that is a-okay. Except right there where I messed it up. Because you're going to cover it up with black, and black will cover it up very easily. So you don't have to worry about that so much. And you will be able to see the lines through the white so that you will be able to still know where you're supposed to paint. I'm just doing the top of his head now. I'm going to continue that line. Just rounding it out using the edge of my brush. Get a little bit more in and fill in. I'm filling in between the top of his head and his eye patch. Globbed it on a little bit. Let me spread that out. Anytime you've noticed you have like just a really thick patch of paint, just go ahead and start working to spread that out. You don't want to leave that. I'm not being super careful to not cover up his eye patch. I'm being pretty, not sloppy because I don't care, but I'm not really worried if I come over the edge of the eye patch. As long as I can still see where that line is, that'll be fine. And whew, it's a good thing I'm not worrying about it because I just definitely went over the edge there. That is the nice thing when you're painting with white paint. As long as you're not painting over an existing color, you don't have to worry too much about where you're painting, because you can always come in with the next color and smooth out those lines. Now I am being a little more careful near my pink or purple donut. I do want that to be. I'm going to go ahead and bring in another coat over here. It's already dried. Smooth that out. Still really globby up here, so I'm going to smooth that out. And go ahead and come in here with a second coat down here at the bottom, because that has definitely already dried. If you notice that yours has already dried and you need a second coat, go ahead and just come in with that. They'll save you some time later. But otherwise, don't worry. Don't try to just do a second coat while it's still wet. That does not work. You'll just spread the paint around and you'll still have patchiness that you have to cover up later. So don't do that. I'm going to go ahead and paint the circle of his eye. I'm going to paint the whole thing white. We are going to come back in with some black there, but I'm just going to come in here and paint that white. Not, again, being super careful to stay in the lines, because it does not matter. It's going to be surrounded by black. And I will use the black paint to really define those lines better. Right now I'm just trying to get that painted white. Hopefully that does not need a second coat. I'd rather not do a second coat there. And we are actually going to come in now, give that a chance to dry, and we're going to do our background. Sometimes I do the black part next, but I think my white is still pretty wet. So I think I'm going to do the background next. I don't want to mix the white and the black. Pandas are not gray, so, you know. So for this, I'm going to mix together this color. Again, this one, if you can get it, China Blue is the color you want to go with. If you cannot, you can mix white and blue cotton, and we're going to just see what kind of color that gets us. I think that will be close. It's looking like it's definitely going to be a very close match to that China Blue. Maybe a little bit more blue than I would want, but that's okay. It may not be. It's hard to tell when paint's wet because it dries a little bit different. So that's my mixture. When you're mixing paint, again, you want to make sure you mix it in towards the center and not out. Because you've mixed outwards, you're going to be painting your palette rather than your canvas. So I've got a glob of paint on my brush right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and come into the center and start spreading that out. I'm going to be very careful as I'm coming up to the white parts that I've already painted. Make sure I'm getting clean lines there. And if I've gone over my line at all, I'm cleaning that line up, that edge up. You don't have to super worry about the lines though when you're coming to where you're going to have black, and being a little bit more careful because the blue does cover the pencil mark better. I want to make sure I know where my edge is there. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to use that same trick where I set my brush down on the canvas and I scooch it up towards the line. And once I'm at it, I bring it down, just using the edge of that, and then away when I'm ready to move. So again, close to it, move away. I've got some definite patchiness. I'm probably going to need another coat even in some places with this blue, but that's okay. So again, on the black, if you go over the line a little, it's not the end of the world, but just make sure you can still see it. This blue covers up the line a little bit better. Well, a lot of it better than the white does. So I am being a little more careful to follow the line rather than go over it. And I've got a little unmixed blue in there. I kind of like that, so I'm going to leave it. I'm going to let that be its thing. If you don't mix your paint well enough, you'll get these like swirls. So you'll have swirls of white and you'll have swirls of darker blue, and then you'll have the mixture color of the two together. And it depends on what you're going for, what effect you want, because that can actually be a really cool thing. I'm going to come over here and just come along the edge. I'm going to go all the way in. I'm definitely going to need a little bit of white there. The pencil is super showing through right there on the white part. I don't want that. So what I'm doing now is filling in the bite mark. And I'm going to grab my smaller brush really quick, get it dried off. And I'm going to come in with that to do this bite mark because the bigger brush is just a little too big to get in there. If it's all you have, you can definitely make that work. But since I do have a smaller brush, I'm going to go in with that. Now I'm going to keep going with my big brush along the edge of the donut. Whoops. Okay, I definitely came in over the edge of my donut with the blue. I'm just going to go and make that edge a slightly different place. So I just painted over some of my purple to make that more of an edge. And I'm going to come in here a little bit more, so that we still have the curvature. So you can fix it. If you wanted, though, to not do it that way, you could just go back over with the purple once the blue dried. You can fix pretty much any mistake like that with acrylics because they're so handy and able to paint over each other. I really like that about acrylics. It's one of the reasons I paint with them a lot. And again, I'm just going along the edge of the ear. And on this, I'm not scooching. I'm not doing the scooching thing that I do a lot. I'm just coming up to the edge and painting away from it. Oh, oops. Don't do what I just did, you guys. I had too much paint on my brush and I did not realize. And I just got a big glob of it on his ear, which I will fix here in a second. So I'm going to go in with a paper towel and we're just going to lift that up. It will paint it a little bit, but fortunately that spot is going to be black and we will just paint right on over it and it will be okay. but we don't want a huge glob of blue right there. I'm also going to take some off the edge, like that. So, like I said, acrylics are very forgiving. And I'm going to keep painting my edge. I got a weird white spot right there, cover that up. Last patch. So what I'm going to do now that I have got my back, oh, nope, I don't have all my background. Look at that. I'm going to go in on this part with my smaller brush because I want that edge to be neat. So I'm going to go in with my small brush for the center of the donut. And that way I can get a nice clean edge. Another little pink cruddy in there. Get it out. Doing the outline first. I'm trying to make sure I get a nice clean circle. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, a donut is usually not a perfect shape. It's roundish, but it's usually not perfectly round. Alright, so now that my background is done, I'm going to give it an eye and see if there are any patchy spots where the white is coming through, where it's dry enough that I can go ahead and put a second coat on before I move on. Most of it's still pretty wet though, but over here I do see some patches. I'm just going to do really broad strokes. I don't really want brush marks for this one. Okay, I'm going to let the rest dry. This side is still really wet. I can tell I'm going to need to patch it and go back over with a second coat, but now is not the right time for that. So I'm going to do another coat of white, I think, in some places. I'm going to do very light on my second coat. I don't want it to take forever to dry because I'm about ready to come in with the black. So I'm just going to come in a few places where I feel like the canvas is showing through more. It's hard to tell on white, and I realize that. So I'm mostly looking for places where the color of the white seems uneven, because it is a slightly different color. This is a little bit more of a pure white than the canvas is even. So I'm kind of able to tell. Being very careful along this edge because that blue is still pretty wet. Ooh, I'm not careful enough. I got a little blue in there. Let me rinse. If you get a little blue on your brush, just go rinse. You don't want to carry that throughout because you were not wanting to rinse your brush off. Just rinse and dry and then come back with some white. And I'm actually going over, as it turns out, most of the face I felt was just slightly patchy. So there you go. I'm definitely going to do a second coat on the eye. I was going to say I'm not going to do a coat on the eye, but I am. It needs it. Unfortunately, that means I'm not going to be able to paint the eyeball for a bit because I will need this to dry so that I don't wind up with a gray eyeball instead of a black eyeball. That's okay. Going very lightly. And I'm going to rinse really, really good because I am ready to go in with some black. Rinsing my brush off. I'm drying it off really, really good just so you guys can see. Even after it's out of the water, I'm taking it on my paper towel and making sure it's super dry. If it's out of shape at all, you can take this moment while it's damp to kind of reshape it with your fingers. And now I'm going to paint his arm. We're going to do black, and we're going to be very careful. Black is very hard to cover up. Black is the one acrylic that you need to be fairly careful with. So I'm going to set it on my canvas, scooch it up to the white part, and drag it along the line. And I dry it out a little bit. Grab some of that so that I can come fill this line in. Just being very careful. You want to go slow when you're painting with black, especially along the lines. When you're filling in, you don't have to go slow. But when you're coming along the edges like this, you really don't need to rush yourself. I'm going very, very, very slow right now. And again, I'm going to scooch right up to the edge. Drag my brush to the side. I'm just smoothing some of the globs away. You want to smooth those towards the center. Coming up to that edge there. I'm going to come in a little less carefully and just get some of the brush marks smoothed out, some of the paint smoothed out. And then I'm going to come in and do his paw, again, just very carefully. I'm using almost not even the edge of the brush on some of this, I'm using really the corner to get in there. You could on this part, it's finicky enough that I might grab my smaller brush if you want to. That is your option. That's up to you. Don't feel like you have to use the same brushes I'm using. Alright, so there's his arm. As you see, the black really cleaned up some of those lines where I had just kind of wherever with the paint. We're going to go in on his ears next. And we're going to hope that A, I don't dip my hair in the paint, and B, that his eyes will dry by the time I'm done with his ears, because they're looking kind of wet, you guys. Alright, we're going to go in on the ears now. We are going to start with this guy over here, I think. And again, I'm going to set my brush down, scooch it up to the edge. I'm going to come along here. This white edge here is a little hard to see because it's white on white. And we've just painted it in there. And oh, I definitely got a little blue in my black. That's okay though. If you get blue and black, you can just paint over it with a second coat of black once it's dry. It did not. That really looked dry to me. I would have been more careful. So again, I'm just coming along. I'm actually, again, kind of for this curve, using more of the corner of the brush than I am the edge. But now that I'm over here, I'm going to use the edge again. Need to round that out. And if you go over into the blue, you can just round it out like that. I just went over a smidge on one spot, and the key is to not freak out or to jerk. Like if you realize you've gone, don't jerk the paint, because then you could do it like a huge line across it. And that would not be great. You could still fix it. It just wouldn't be the best. Alright. So again, I kind of painted that really slowly. Just pulling some of the globs away. There's a sort of a glob here on the edge where I went in. I'm actually going to finish the edge a little more. I see some white. So there we go. do give it a look when you are doing it to make sure you've gotten all of it, that you haven't been so careful on the edges that you left like a line of white or anything like that. So before you move on, just give it another look. Ew. I've got a lot of crusties in my paint today, you guys. It may be time for new paints. All right, so we're going to come in with this other ear and come in with the center, come up to the edge, paint along the line. I definitely went over with the blue here, so I'm just going to paint right over that and then come along the white. Switch hands here. Alright, I am going to get my smaller brush. I'm having some trouble on the curves of these ears staying in the lines that I've set up. I don't want to accidentally go over really bad. So we're just going to use the small brush along the line. Now I have painted over it a little bit with the blue, so I'm going over the blue a smidge, but I am trying to follow a neat line. And the curve of that ear was just getting a little hard with the width of that brush, the flat part of that brush. You need something a little smaller. Ooh, I'm a little shaky. I just made a weird, there's a wonky ear now. Let me fix that. There we go. I'm just going to fill in. I'm going to move around, spread the globs out a little bit. Okay. Now, unfortunately, my little eyes are still pretty wet and the area around my eye patch is still really wet. So I'm going to switch really quick to, and I will definitely be using the smaller brush for the eyes, for both the patch and the eyeball, the pupil. I will be using the small brush for that. You don't want to try to get in there with a big brush. You probably could, but why when you don't have to? So I'm going to patch in on some of the blue background. I have a few places. Let's hold it up and see, make sure I don't have any black on my thumb here. If you guys can see, right in this area, I have some patches of white showing through. So we're just going to give it another coat. I'm not getting too close. The edges are pretty good around the Panda, so I'm not going to do any of those. I don't think I need to patch anywhere. Oh, I lie. I definitely need to patch right here. Very carefully, because that black is 100% not dry. And I do not want to get it in my blue. That would be hard to cover up. You could do it, but it would be hard. Again, I have a crusty. Ugh. Let's see. Need to patch over here. It's totally wrong about the area around the ears. It definitely had some white showing through. What can you do? Up here a little, and wow, what is going on? I'm going to go in with just a clean finger and get whatever that is out. If you're going to touch it with your fingers, just make sure that they are clean. I get paint all over my hands when I'm doing this. You don't want to like touch down with black paint, say, on your finger. If you didn't realize it was there, that's a bummer when that happens. I am going to fill in a little bit on just the inside of the donut. I'm not going to try to get too close to the edge just because I don't want to have to patch anything if I go over. Being careful. And I think that's good. And I think now the area around my eye patches is dry enough that I can come in with some black. So I'm going to rinse my brush really good, dry it off, and I'm using my little one. I'm going to shape it into more of a point. I'm going to go in with some black. So just right around the edge, I'm going to start up here. I'm definitely going over the white because I went over the line. So just make sure you know where your line is, so that you're not going somewhere you don't want to go. Ooh, it's a little wet still right there. I'm going to leave that spot, and I'll come back over it and fix it in a minute. Let me get a slightly wider bottom eye because it was bleeding into the white there in a weird way, almost like I had some runniness in the paint. It didn't look runny, but sometimes if you haven't shaken the bottles really well before you put it down, it can do that. And that's not my favorite. Just going along the edge of the eye very carefully. And there's one eye patch. I'm going to come in with the other one now. On this one I am going to be pretty careful because there are still some wet patches around it. But we are almost done with our Panda, you guys. I really went over the edge on this one with the white, but that is okay. Alright, so there's his eye patch done, and he is almost dry on the center, which is good. He's almost dry right there, which is where our nose is going to be. So hopefully by the time I'm done, he'll be all the way dry. So we're going to just make a little round circle of black paint right in the center here. I'm going to take it pretty wide. There's not going to be much white showing around it. Ooh. Dry my brush off. Definitely got some white paint mixed in there. I will go back over that, because that is definitely a little bit more gray now. I'm going to rinse my brush to get any white off. I will just go back over that once it's dry again with some black, and that will solve that problem. Again, taking the eye, really close. I'm definitely not quite dry. I was not dry enough to do this, but that is okay. I will fill in with black again later. This is mostly to show you guys how to do it. Mine does not have to look perfect. So like that. Once that is completely dry, we'll add a little white dot right there and there. You almost don't have to do it completely dry. You just do a dot, but you got to be careful. But I'll show you how to do that in a sec. Again, I'm going to wipe my brush and rinse it really good. Make sure you don't have gray when I'm going to go in with the nose. So we're going to put his nose in. It is a triangle with rounded corners. We're going to put it right about here. I'm just going to round the corners out. I'm just sketching it kind of with the paint right now, and then we'll fill it in neater. Wow, that white is really spreading, even though that was really dry. Okay, there we go. And we're going to give him a mouth. He's got a sad mouth. You can give yours whatever mouth you want. I'm going to stick with a sad mouth on mine. And that is our panda painting. We're going to add our white dots for his eye, just super fast. And for this, if your paint is dry, ideally just wait until his eyes are dry. But I'm going to show you on one of mine so that will know how to do it. You're going to get a decent amount of white on your paint, on your paintbrush. And you're just going to boop, like that. So you've got like this glob on there. So you're not really dragging it, you're just kind of booping it in on there. A white dot. So you can do that when it's still a little wet, because you're not really dragging your paintbrush. You just have to make sure you don't drag your paintbrush. I'm going to dry it off really good, and now we're going to add some sprinkles. I almost forgot my sprinkles. It'd be a sad, plain purple donut without them. I'm going to go in with some orange, and I'm just going to put little lines wherever I think a sprinkle should be. You might need to do 2 coats on these. It just kind of depends on whether that purple is going to show through or not and how thin the paint was. I'll put some just random sprinkles, and now I'm going to switch to my green Key West color and do the same thing. It is kind of runny. I'm a little worried that this one will definitely need a second coat, but that'll be okay if it does. And again, just some random lines. All right, and you have a super cute, kind of sad, maybe a little grumpy panda with a donut. I hope you guys had fun with this tutorial, and I hope you guys will send us in your paintings. We would love to see them. You can send them to summerreading@hmcpl.org, and we would love to see what you come up with your panda paintings. Thank you.